Aren't all BL games just porn? Well, no. But to clearly evaluate this, we shall look at the BL games available on the Switch. Starting with the category I call my first BL game, if you're not too familiar with the genre yet. And one of the games is Hashihime of the Old Booktown. It's going to release on the 16th of September 2021 and is also available on Switch and PC. After being kicked out of his boarding house in the Taishou period, the dreamy Tamamori, who has the tendency to live in his own fantasies, luckily starts working in an old second-hand bookstore where he enjoys his time with his real and imaginary friends. But suddenly a mysterious death befalls his friend, and Tamamori realizes he has the ability to go back in time 3 days to try save his friend. Racing to save his friend, it becomes unclear what is fantasy and what is reality. The first route you'll be able to play is actually his best friend's Minakami's route. He's his calm childhood friend and bookworm who lives for Tamamori's stories and is the only one who is officially gay and in love with Tamamori from the beginning, but doesn't make a move because of social pressure, guilt and fear of losing Tamamori. Kawase is his other childhood friend, a genius, quite spirited student who is so handsome to even have fans. Though he isn't initially a bad guy, he's kind of a sadist who especially enjoys teasing Tamamori and criticizing his stories. But still, something seems off about him. For example, that he's low-key happy about Minakami's death, so he can have Tamamori for himself. Hanazawa used to be a childhood friend of those three as well, but somehow grew estranged to them. He even was like an older brother to Tamamori. Now he's a passionate and righteous lieutenant in the military. Lastly, the strange Hikawa, who suddenly appeared at the bookstore where Tamamori is working and asked to be called Professor. He turns out to be a nervous person and a fan of Tamamori's stories, who can be quite eccentric with his inventions and is almost creepily friendly to Tamamori. What starts out as a murder mystery quickly turns out to be more of existential horror. What stands out about the game is the linear storytelling. Though you have choices, the route order is practically set and the way how you progress through the game. But still there are many plot twists and the game will definitely give you a scare and surprise you. This game is also not the steamiest among BL games, but still has its fair share of romance and explicit scenes. And it can truly be recommended if you're interested in some psychedelic horror elements. Another game that will release on the 24th of March 2022 is Tokyo 24th Ku, so 24th District. The MC is Akihiro, who is a member of the House of Representatives and is appointed to clear a case of terrorist bombing, putting his whole career at risk. And that is when the drama of the ambitious upper class begins. The dateable men are: Taiga is a calm, lovely puppy dog who will support the MC in every way he can. Asuma is the child of a wealthy family who has been supporting the MC's political career. Starting out hostile and rude, he quickly turns out to be not as bad as it first seems. Takemi is a governor who promised to investigate unsolved suicide cases, but isn't exactly an ally in the common route, as he technically starts out as Akihiro's rival. Lastly, Kazuki is the MC's secretary who supports the protagonist in his political career. This game has a heavy political plot that is rather accompanied by romance, but romance is not the focus of the game. The last game in this section is Taishou Mebiusline. That's already released on the Switch and PC and also has an anime adaptation. Kyoichiro, who is able to see dead people, moves from the countryside to Tokyo in the Taishou area. There he gets entangled in a conflict between the Imperial Army and a mysterious clan, all wanting him to join forces with them to take advantage of his ability. But maybe this conflict is even grander than he could have imagined. The men we can choose to side with are Shigure, the rash leader of the competing magical organization, and a guy carrying 5 swords. Iori is part of the military and wants the help of the spirits of the dead to help defend the country. But considering his rather sadistic and intelligent character, he might as well have other goals. Kai also has the ability to see the spirits and is in command of the special unit in the military, but does hunt for the competing clan in a much nicer way than Iori does. Though he can seem stiff, he also can turn out rather charming. Misaki is a mysterious stranger who helps Kyoichiro several times, but also warns him not to get further involved. He seems quite caring about Koichiro and can get pretty fierce if he's in danger. All the men in Taishou Mebiusline have so pretty hair. This game is also rather plot heavy with some fantasy elements and the political and military conflict. Though there are obviously scenes of violence and sexual content, it's also not as explicit as in some other games, though there are still some non-con scenes. Nevertheless, it's still a rather romantic game. And the language is totally difficult, even for Japanese people, so definitely not recommended for Japanese learners. Now we come to the game that I call the real BL experience, so probably games that represent the stereotypes of the genre, so games that are more explicit and more mature. And one of your first BL games could be Lucky Dog. It will be released on the 21st January 2022 on the Switch, and I think it's already available on the PC, and there's also a manga version of this game. It's about a boy, Jin, doing every job he can for the Italian mafia in America of the 1930s, though his special skill is to get out of prison, as he one day gets the mission to bail out 4 mafia bosses he's currently in prison with, to earn a top position in the hierarchy. And those 4 people are Ivan. He's kind of short-tempered and easily gets into fights, not being Italian himself. He wants to create a mafia organization where origin is of no importance. Bernardo is the oldest of the group and has a jokingly flirty relationship with Gian, I don't know Italian, sorry. He's smart and strategizing and overall a sensible man. Lucino is the confident womanizer with a weakness for blondes. That doesn't mean though he's not caring or a sensitive person, but still mourns the loss of his wife and daughter. Giulio is a cold-blooded assassin who can go mad in fights, but in other situations behaves rather calmly and politely. This game is praised for a strong protagonist and overall lovable character interactions. It's a bit more action-oriented and not as romance-based, but still the romance is rather fluffy and there are a lot of bad endings to discover. I think the game that can be called most stereotypical for the BL genre is Omega Vampire, available on the Switch and PC. In a world where humans and vampires live in an unstable harmony due to artificial blood provided to the vampires, for some reason or another the MC Keiichi, who despises vampires and the hierarchy of Omega vampires, alphas and betas, suddenly turns into a high-class vampire himself, full of pheromones and delicious blood. I guess you can imagine where that leads to. The 4 love interests are Genma, an alpha vampire who can be considered a kind of mentor to Keiichi, as he's already lived for quite a while and follows his strict code of honor. Heinrich, a German alpha vampire, even older than Genma, and a huge playboy, and not exactly the good guy, but at least with something like a subtle redemption arc. Does he look sexy or like a rapist? Hakuro is a tsundere werewolf, and being a werewolf, the root doesn't reveal much about the plot, but is more focused on his past. Lastly, Setsuna, a better human and blood researcher, who actually turned Keiichi into a vampire in order to save his life. Until then, who has always been a good, but slightly overprotective friend to Keiichi. What stands out about this game are the timed choices and definitely the explicit, mature content. I believe for the Switch version it has been heavily censored. There's a lot of violence, a lot of dub or non-con scenes, and that could lead to the judgment that the romance is not very well paced and it's more focused on the sexual content actually. Now I have some honorable mentions I call the heartwarming underdogs. And those are Dream Daddy, you might all know because it's a PC game that also has been ported on the Switch in Japanese and English. You can fully customize your daddy while taking care of your daughter, go out and about dating other daddies. This game has some mini games, it's rather like short and fun, and on top of dating other daddies, it also focuses heavily on you being a daddy and caring for your daughter and bonding with your daughter. So it's a bit more like a heartwarming family simulator. Another very small title is called Blind Man on the Switch and PC, available in English, Spanish and German. Finally, your wildest dreams come true because you can play the supervillain in this story. You are the next aspiring supervillain, but your evil plan is meddled with by handsome men. In this game there aren't too many choices, but still many endings, and it's obviously a short and rather light-hearted game. And lastly, Arcade Spirits, that's also available on Switch and PC, but only in English, and is set in a world where arcades are still a thing and you can romance people you meet there. This game is not technically a BL game because you can customize your character and then practically date whoever you want, or just stay on a platonic relationship. But as it's very inclusive and you can be a gay man, I still included it on the list. It's also a light-hearted game that focuses on the nostalgia for arcades while you try to raise your character stats to appeal to your friends or love interests. It also sometimes touches on deeper stories, but considering it's rather short, it still stays kind of superficial in that regard. Should you play BL games? I think this little list shows that though the genre is still small on the Switch, it already has a wide variety of different games, ranging from like a more fun rom-com action Prison Break to more political stories to horror and lastly to very adult, mature content. But should I play it even if I'm a girl? And yes, of course you should. From what I've read, the protagonists are very well written and even tend to be kind of similar to female protagonists in them being a bit more submissive. But yet you should consider the overall tone or even art of the game, because my impression is that the topics tend to be more mature or like shonen manga like the action-oriented mafia stories, or really mature or horror stories involving landmines like rape and abuse. And also the art style of this game seems a bit harsher, if that makes sense, compared to many Otome games. Not saying there aren't mature Otome games or with the edgy art style, but you'll also find many Otome games with lighter colors or lighter content. But I still think that those BL games can appeal to a wider audience if you know what you're getting yourself into. I hope this video helped you to get a bit more into BL games. Now I'm curious which game piqued your interest or which BL games you would recommend. And if you are into hopeless dark games, Shu no Witch could be something for you, or if you're looking for some more passion, maybe Olympia Soiree or Cupid Parasite could be interesting for you. And consider to like or subscribe if you want to see more of Japanese Otome game related content.